Chelsea had been purchased by Roman Abramovich, but only now were they allowed to be rampantly successful. It was a special time for Chelsea, and it is because of the special one. These are the Jose Mourinho days at Stamford Bridge. Jose Mourinho was born into football and born into a special life. His grandfather was president of Vitória de Setúbal, his father was a goalkeeper who has a penalty save off Eusebio on his resume, and then after flirting with a playing career, a young Jose decided that he would be best served by becoming a coach. While studying at college, Jose was influenced by a professor named Manuel Sergio, who told him that football knowledge on its own was not enough to become a world-renowned coach. He had to become a psychologist as well. You could say that those early teachings inferred Mourinho's whole professional life thereafter. He left college juggling working as a PE teacher as well as compiling scout reports on his father's opponents before finally officially joining his father at Vitória de Setúbal as a youth coach. Through Estrela de Amadora and Ovarense, Jose Mourinho received his big break by working with Bobby Robson at Sporting. Robson took to Mourinho, and through translating as well as his obvious tactical acumen, the Englishman trusted the young upstart enough to take him to Porto and Barcelona, as he was gifted a perfect environment to learn more and more responsibilities. By the mid-90s, Mourinho had found himself linking up with the great tactical thinkers of his day, staying on after Bobby Robson's execution to work under new manager Louis van Gaal. The players at the club read like a who's who of the greater good of modern football management. People like Pep Guardiola, Luis Enrique and Ronald Koeman, more so than Julian Lopetegui, Laurent Blanc and Philippe Cocu. Like Robson, Van Gaal was enamoured enough with the Portuguese coach that he allowed him to give out tactical advice, half-time team talks and coach-friendly matches. By 2000, he had outgrown the position and became the official assistant manager of Benfica. Typically, it wouldn't last long. Thrown in at the deep end after just 4 matches, manager Jupp Heynckes departed, and it was only a further 9 games thereafter in which Mourinho's managerial tenure of Benfica encapsulated because of a dispute with the incoming club president who wanted a new man in the hot seat. Nonetheless, Mourinho worked his way up, taking no-hopers União de Lieira to 3rd midway through the 2001-2 season with a stubborn counter-attacking style. Even though Lieira fell away, the 12-month experience was enough for Porto to take a shot in the dark with Mourinho. It pretty much changed European football forever. At home, Jose would adopt the tactical blueprint of his day, the 4-3-3, and romp to successive Primeira titles with Porto. On the continent, however, Mourinho was even more conservative, dropping in a midfield diamond of the holding Costinha, the shuttle-in pair of Manish and Dmitry Elenichev with the talismanic Deco behind 2 number 9s. Meanwhile, the marauding fullbacks of Paulo Ferreira and Nuno Valente created the width. The results? Perfect.
It's McCarthy. It's a good save by Howard. It's been turned in by Costinha. Last minute, Porto have pulled off a European shot.
And with that, Jose Mourinho was officially not one of the bottle. He was a special one. And there was a football club in England who wanted to be a special one as well. If the wider world hadn't pricked their ears up for what Jose Mourinho stood for in Portugal, and if they still ignored his successes in Seville against Celtic in the UEFA Cup final, then certainly everyone in Britain stood to attention when his Porto side dumped Manchester United out of the Champions League last 16 in 2004. It wasn't just for the victory. United were going through a bit of a wobbly patch, so it wasn't as much of a scalp as, say, it would have been 5 years prior. But it was the manner of the celebration as Mourinho wheeled away down the Old Trafford touchline to celebrate the last-minute goal with his players. English football and its most notable team were officially put on high alert. That summer, with the acquisition of Jose, the Premier League was about to get a little livelier. Chelsea, as we've spoken about in this issue of videos a lot, hadn't really done much in the Premier League until they acquired a continental touch through the player-manager of Glenn Hoddle before Ruud Gullit and Gianluca Vialli won them some trophies. Claudio Ranieri had been the next man in the pipeline and set the table for the first few years of a new dynasty at Stamford Bridge, but ultimately had not been successful. The new owner, Roman Abramovich, signalled his intent to Europe when he declared a Champions League semi-final and second place in the Premier League not good enough, despite both of those being record returns for Chelsea in the Premier League age. It's the way of the world and especially pertinent for this club and in this time, but we should talk about transfers. Whereas the prior year with your Glenn Johnson and your Juan Sebastian Veron, your Hernan Crespo and your Scott Parker, things were a little slapdash and scattergunned. In the summer of 2004 though, Mourinho knew who he wanted, he had the money to get it, and by deadline day the club had them and had started the season impeccably. Joining him from Porto were two key defensive names, Paulo Ferreira as a versatile fullback on the right who could sit or provide width, and Ricardo Carvalho who was to be the centre-half partner of club captain John Terry. Benfica's Thiago completed the triple Portuguese swoop, shuttling in midfield, whilst Arjen Robben and Mieta Kesman represented a double splurge from PSV Eindhoven. Two raw talents for the future as well as the now. Robben would be eased in as a winger and Kesman had been prolific in the Eredivisie. The activity was completed by Petr Cech, who had just come off a stunning European Championships with Czech Republic and had quickly eloped to rival that of Iker Casillas, Oliver Kahn and Gigi Buffon as one of the world's greatest goalkeepers. And at the other end of the pitch, the completion of Chelsea's spine, Didier Drogba, after his impressive displays both in Ligue 1 but more so in the UEFA Cup as his Marseille side reached the final. It would take him time to find his feet, but he would become one of the more important players in club history. So too would it take time for Mourinho to find his feet. He entered the Premier League a cautious optimist, utilising the diamond system he'd grown fond of in the Champions League. Makelele at the base, Lampard at the tip, with a strong defensive four and a glut of talent to choose from. Up front, it ought to have been a match made in heaven. Instead, whilst Chelsea did glean an unbeaten 14 points from their first 6 matches and beat Manchester United on the opening afternoon, it wasn't setting the world ablaze. 6 goals were scored in as many games, as what little goals scored dried up by the ties against Aston Villa and Tottenham Hotspur in September after the international break. So Jose shifted things, relying on his domestic style from Porto. The 4-3-3 was in for the successful trip to the Riverside in a by now typical 1-0 win. It gave Mourinho the best of both worlds, width from either Arjen Robben, Damien Duff or Joe Cole, with one central forward drifting right, and largely allowed Lampard to attack from deep, safe in the knowledge that nothing could get past midfield partner Claude Makelele. Still, they retained a lower line because of John Terry's severe lack of pace, as Wayne Bridge and Paulo Ferreira were largely shackled to defensive duties. Another win followed, 1-0 again for show, but this one infinitely more crucial in sitting down Rafael Benitez and his new Liverpool team. The first of many clashes, some might say far too many, as Mourinho met Benitez for the first time as manager of Chelsea and Liverpool. After an aberration of a 1-0 defeat to a piss-poor Manchester City team came after the October internationals, Mourinho's Chelsea turned on the style. 4 goals were slapped beyond each of Blackburn, West Brom, Fulham, Charlton, Newcastle and Norwich all before Christmas, whilst Everton were also defeated and the club remained unbeaten through draws at home to Bolton and at Highbury. This was the supposedly invincible Arsenal and they were laying in the muck come Christmas time. 5 points the difference with 20 matches to go, and Chelsea had only shipped 8 goals all season and were going to tighten up even more so. It didn't matter either that they fought on numerous fronts. Returning to Porto as well as nipping to Moscow and Paris was a Champions League group stage breeze. Meanwhile, the great and good all fell in the League Cup as Mourinho penciled in a first final as Chelsea boss with a win at Old Trafford after extra time. The last week of February meant a momentous 7 days in 3 separate cup competitions. First the FA Cup and the first true blemish against Mourinho's early tenure at Stamford Bridge, as Newcastle claimed revenge for their 4th round League Cup exit by taking Chelsea's name in the FA Cup's 5th round. Then to Barcelona, where one of the all-time Champions League knockout ties of the modern era took place. The result worked just perfectly in Mourinho's world, an away goal with a level playing field to come at Stamford Bridge, even if the ramifications were being felt long after the trip to the Camp Nou after the Anders Frisk debacle, where Chelsea claimed a clandestine half-time meeting between the Swedish referee and the Barca manager Frank Rijkaard at half-time. Revenge would have to wait because there was a new rivalry brewing back home, and it had its first marquee fixture in the League Cup final at the Millennium Stadium. Liverpool, Chelsea, Benitez, Mourinho with the first trophy of the season on offer.
Operator has been calling for it long and hard. Oh, the kick has gone in, it's an own goal. It's a long throw and it's gone through to Drogba. It is Ida Gudjonsson back in. And it's stabbed in. Kick. Oh, and it's turned in. He's a cup-winning captain.
The Premier League was effectively won by the time Rijkaard came to West London with a quarter-final chance of a touchline bare knuckle. Chelsea hadn't even threatened to concede a goal since they shipped 2 back at Highbury. Norwich didn't score, Villa didn't score, Portsmouth didn't score, Liverpool didn't score, Middlesbrough didn't score, Spurs obviously didn't score, Portsmouth didn't score again, Blackburn didn't score, City didn't score and Everton did not score. The only teams to take points off Chelsea in this 3-month span was, quirkily, Manchester City, who were one of just 2 clubs that the Blues failed to beat in the 2004-05 season, and the bad City as well. All that point was doing was delaying the inevitable. Chelsea led Manchester United by 8 points, had a game in hand, and that was despite Norwich City managing to put a goal beyond the now record-breaking Petr Cech. Forget all that nonsense, that was tiddlywink stuff. The real main event was now to be had in the Champions League. Chelsea, Barcelona. Box office.
Johnson, it's still Johnson. It's 1-0 Chelsea. John said it's working well for Cole. The shot's deflected, and it's in. They might be watching another goal here. It's tough. He's through. This is unbelievable. Oh, when he's on the ball, and he's just dinged that out of nowhere. Time there's a set piece. There's going to be a chance. It's Terry's header, and it's in.
It was a monumental hurdle for a Chelsea team who had come close to eliminating Barcelona from a first knockout round 5 years prior. This time both teams were at the top of the sport, and it was pretty much agreed that one of them ought to be contesting the final. It was the only contest Chelsea now faced after all. West Brom, Crystal Palace and Southampton, 3 teams all mired in that dramatic relegation dogfight, all fell comfortably to the soon-to-be champions, a tag only delayed by April draws to Birmingham City and Arsenal. The title parade was now recalibrated to April 30th and a trip to Bolton Wanderers. Those drop points, however, were interwoven with some pretty special European nights for the Blues.
Looking to get away quickly, and they have. Roberto brings the save. Schweinsteiger. It's Drogba. It's Lampard. Akaleli once more. Lampard. Oh, what a goal! The header into the centre. Drogba lashes it home.
Jose Mourinho had equalled Claudio Ranieri's return of the prior season, a Champions League semi-final, a joint best for the club, but whilst the Tinkerman had fiddled his way through Stuttgart and Arsenal, Mourinho had smashed 2 of Europe's finest in Barcelona and Bayern Munich. Another of Europe's elite, comfortably England's best performing team on the continent was next, in a reprisal of Mourinho versus Benitez, which, as these matches often would, ended 0-0 on Chelsea soil. That didn't matter, in fact, it played into Mourinho's hands. He loved a goalless home draw, followed by the old smash and grab in the opponent's backyard. Just ask Deportivo La Coruña about that from the same stage a year prior. Plus, there was a big reason to celebrate in the weekend that straddled the 2 Liverpool legs. 50 years of hurt was over.
Oh, here's Chelsea with Lampard. He's into the box, Frank Lampard. This could be a seminal moment. He's scored! Chelsea have got 2-on-2 here. This could be the title. Frank Lampard to win it! He's got it!
League One, League Cup already in the bag, and now confirming a trip to Istanbul was all that was standing in the way between an already all-time greatest season in Chelsea history becoming even greater. Liverpool, a team they'd beaten 3 times already that season, surely it would take something only from the moon to stop the Blues now.
Gerrard's touch. Luis Garcia and Liverpool celebrate. The goal's been given.
And so it did. Chelsea's season over, but in claiming 7 points from their final 3 matches, they had broken every record going in the Premier League. Most points accrued, least goals conceded. Chelsea were the record breakers, and there was only a little league blot up in Manchester that stopped them from being invincible. Still, it wasn't enough for Roman Abramovich. He'd poured so much more money into the club, he'd bought the club off the basis of a wildly entertaining 4-3 Manchester United win over Real Madrid 2 years prior. Therefore, he wanted to be entertained. So Mourinho had to adapt as he was handed back Hernan Crespo up front, Sean Wright-Phillips for the wing, and Michael Essien to shore up midfield. He tried to experiment with a front 2 again so he could fit in all his acquisitions into one team, but quickly he reverted to the 4-3-3 that accompanied him throughout the majority of the prior season. And in the end, similar results. They were only 4 points poorer off in winning the league because of an easing off the gas exercise away in their last 2 games at Blackburn and Newcastle. The League Cup wasn't defended as the Blues crashed out at the first hurdle against Charlton Athletic, but it was ultimately the League Cup and it didn't matter. What mattered now, as it was made abundantly clear, was the Champions League. Because UEFA still hadn't figured out a way to crowbar a 5th English club in Liverpool into a group stage draw, that being despite Everton failing to get out of qualifying, we got 2 more insatiable rounds of Mourinho versus Benitez. The record stood 3 to Mourinho, 1 to Benitez, with 1 to share. After 180 hardly pulsating minutes of group football, there were no more wins or no more goals either. Tactically, it may well have been gripping, but entertainment-wise, truly awful. Still, when it mattered that season, Mourinho beat Benitez handedly.
Referee makes sure everybody's out. Here comes Lampard. Up here again. Damien Duff. Surely makes it 2. Yes! He does. Can he finish? He can't, but Joe Cole will. Robin misses his touch. Surely now. Yes. Jeremy scores. Terry got a touch on it. And it's in. Elorno helps it back in. Crespo's onside. How about that for a finish?
And with the league just one mouth-watering match at home to Manchester United away from a second Premier League title in succession, the Blues travel northward to their title rivals' home to book another trip to Cardiff for the FA Cup final. Mourinho had got on revenge over Newcastle for the cup exit of the prior season, and it was typically Liverpool standing in Mourinho's way to completing the English set of trophies inside of just 12 months. I say that because contesting the other semi-final were Middlesbrough and West Ham. The domestic record between Liverpool and Chelsea pointed only one way. It was 5 Mourinho wins to 0 Benitez victories. And then...
And it's in! See a breaking now. Another chance. And this time he has taken it.
Alright, the proper domestic double of League and Cup wasn't won and would have been nice, but Mourinho's Chelsea was still undisputably the best team in England. Europe, however, was the only arena in which Jose Mourinho and Chelsea suffered a massive regression as they met Barcelona across 2 legs of a Champions League last 16 once again, only for the Spaniards to get revenge. As it stood, when Mourinho took a football team into European competition, he had either won the tournament his team was in, or he had only gone down to the eventual Champions League winners. Either way, Chelsea and Mourinho would get their Champions League revenge over Barcelona, edging them out of a top spot in another hotly contested group stage by gaining 4 points over Frank Rijkaard's team. Don't worry though, their other great European rivals wouldn't be too far down the track, and Rafael Benitez would be granted to Jose Mourinho just as soon as Chelsea dispatched both he and Benitez's former clubs in Porto and Valencia in the knockouts prior to the semis. But hold on, this is a Jose Mourinho 3rd season in charge of a club, so you're probably wondering when the whole thing catches fire and the manager torches his own tenure at the club. Don't worry though, there were signs. First off, he was handled another big old pile of cash in acquiring Ashley Cole, Michael Ballack, Solomon Kalou and Andrei Shevchenko, the latter presumably merely an appeasement to the club owner because the Ukrainian arrived crocked, the wrong side of 30 and incompatible with Mourinho's plans. The Portuguese manager didn't use two forwards as much as Abramovich might have wanted him to, and Shevchenko wasn't about to unseat Didier Drogba from the centre-forward position. After all, the Ivorian had become quite good at scoring in cup finals for the Blues. And what it meant was that Chelsea were entering the April 25th, 2007 hosting of Liverpool in the semi-final of the Champions League with a quite frankly absurd quadruple looming large. The FA Cup win was to come, but the League Cup was already in the bank and Chelsea were within touching distance of Manchester United, and they still had the leaders to host at Stamford Bridge. Liverpool had finally got on a victory over Chelsea in league competition at the sixth time of asking. That defeat by Benitez inflicted on Mourinho must have angered the manager and his team because they went on a 9-match winning run that stopped just about short of double figures away at St James's Park 3 days before the all-important European semi against the Reds. It was a missed chance for Mourinho to close the gap to a point at the top of the league. However, just as league form had gone against Mourinho versus Benitez, European form was about to turn on its head against Liverpool as well. And I suppose when you're chasing a quadruple, what we call the business end of the season trademark is always going to be congested at one point or another. April 28th was that afternoon. Manchester United travelled to Everton, Chelsea hosted Sam Allardyce's Bolton Wanderers, and both were due on away Champions League semi-final duty after winning their home first leg marginally. Neither team needed the most momentous day in the Premier League title race as both kicked off at 12:45.
Winds up, drills it, and it's played in by Timourian. And it's stabbed in! Bridge plays it in, and the equaliser! Proceedings. Lampard's delivery. Ball from Arteta, still Fernandes! Straight into the arms of Turner, but it wasn't. Ronaldo, goalkeeper saved it, off the line in it. It's come to Rooney, it's brilliant from Rooney, it's fantastic for Ronaldo. It's Chris Eagles, oh!
The gap was now 5 points with 3 matches to play. What it meant was an unassailable gap confirmed 8 days later when Chelsea couldn't match United's win in the Manchester derby when they travelled across town to the Emirates. It was a rare moral victory for Arsene Wenger over Jose Mourinho. But it wasn't the worst heartbreak Chelsea had suffered that week. Cue the cop, cue a Champions League semi-final under the Anfield lights.
It's gone short instead. With Dutchman, and Reina has saved it. Makes it 2 out of scores. The 100%. Oh, and Reina's done it again. Liverpool are heading to Athens.
Chelsea had strived for a quadruple only ever experienced in Europe by Celtic 40 years previously. They wound up with the 2 they didn't want as Liverpool celebrated another Champions League final against Milan and Chelsea mourned the fact that they couldn't get over the line again. For the first time, Mourinho looked dishevelled. Like I said, there were signs. Think back to those signings, Ballack, Essien, Cole and Shevchenko. Of those, only Cole was remotely defensively minded and in fixing a left-back problem, he wasn't particularly versatile. It all came to a head at the home of Wycombe Wanderers, of all teams, on January the 10th in the first leg of a League Cup semi-final. Mourinho fumed that he had to play Paulo Ferreira and Michael Essien at centre-half and berated his lack of options in the position. When Abramovich supplemented those desires in signing Tal Ben Haim, the legendary Tal Ben Haim, Mourinho wouldn't be around to see his much maligned Stamford Bridge career that totalled a whopping 13 Premier League Chelsea games. No, Mourinho was gone after the atmosphere went to a simmer when Avram Grant was hired as a technical director in the summer of 2007. Within weeks of the Israeli watching over Mourinho, the manager had gone full Jose. After a league loss at Villa Park and a Champions League stalemate at home to Rosenborg, the special times at Stamford Bridge were over. It was the biggest downgrade in managerial history. Chelsea had traded in a serial winner in Jose Mourinho, a man who had won almost everything at record-breaking pace and with record-breaking numbers, for Avram Grant, who had yet to manage outside of his homeland. Mourinho's crime was becoming increasingly cantankerous, which is his now default setting, but also not being able to claim what was by 2007 Roman Abramovich's holy grail. He was desperate for the soft power and the material success a Champions League would deliver. Of all people, it was Avram Grant who got Chelsea to their first ever UEFA Champions League final. This probably less so down to the man management and tactical genius of Avram Grant, and more so attributable to the core group of players that were reared and raised on Mourinho, the spine of Cech, Terry, Lampard and Drogba, all of which could quite easily be placed into a World 11 by the time Chelsea met Manchester United in Moscow on May the 21st, 2008. After another battle for the ages, the Blues missed out, both at home and on the Champions League, and both too united by the narrowest of margins. First on the final day of the league season, second via penalties after John Terry crucially slipped and Edwin van der Sar was equal to Nicola Anelka's effort. Jose Mourinho would be back and he would be successful again. He'd perform his usual winning of the League Cup and the Premier League in typical fashion before flaking out on the big one, the one Roman Abramovich really wanted before torching ground. He received Chelsea the second time around as former European champions, the trophy that he was really designed to hand to Stamford Bridge but couldn't. But there was a time as recent as the Premier League era that even qualifying for the Champions League was a pipe dream. Learn about those eras here.